The Epic of Alexander, The Endless Death of Daniel Dwyer by Tim Mckeever. Book 1, The Answer. Chapter 1. Llewellyn 12.1, March 14th, 2311 AD. In the time of the 12th and final rebirth of Llewellyn, it was Daniel Dwyer and not Llewellyn who was revered as a god. Though were it not for the coming of Daniel, she could have come to be seated in that throne. She could have been seen as the savior of humanity. The world would have had to drastically change, but if things had been any different, she would likely have been placed on a pedestal, held in the highest regard and been a sought-after consult if only Daniel did not exist. He had been dead for over 200 years, yet he was stronger than ever. There was no stopping him now, there never was. It was not as she desired only for Daniel to suffer, but was as it should be, as it had to be. After all, this version of reality was her creation, a mindfully crafted product of devotion to her own self-preservation and triumph. The rise of her unwitting rival could not have been circumvented. Things could not be different lest she was to release her grip on fate, nor could they be any more perfect. The pieces had found their way to their places. That pillar of hate which was her rival had been pacified, subdued by a helpless people with outstretched hands. He was distracted. He would never suspect her, nor she herself, until it was too late. The world loved Daniel Dwyer. She was going to fashion that love into the deadliest of weapons. The world belonged to Daniel Dwyer. She was going to arrest him of that burden and birth a new future, her future. Yet, with things as they are, today the two of them are friends. With things as they are, the vessel of Llewellyn could not have conceived of a future wherein she offers the world, let alone her beloved Daniel, anything bereft of good intent. What a difference 2 weeks can make, especially when all of the world is bending in one direction. By design, Llewellyn's 11th and 12th incarnations were blind, the 11th having been robbed of her sight, the 12th having been born blind. So it came to be that Emma Carter was born blind, such as she was. As it was with all of the embodiments of Llewellyn, she began to see into the future after having reached puberty, and as it was with all of them, this ability to see the future was accomplished by way of seeing through the eyes of other people. Emma, with her glossed-over, blind, white pupils, would look you right in the eye when she was talking to you, something that unnerved many she interacted with. She would look at herself through their eyes, and she could see through the eyes of everyone. As it was with all who would be Llewellyn, her ability to see into the future expanded with the passing of the days, and by the time she'd reached her current age of 54 and change, Emma could see more than 8 days into the future and was gaining further insight every day. A gift that would have seen her rise to fame, fortune, and beyond were it not for the fact that every facet of the world was engrossed by Daniel Dwyer. She was a celebrity by any standard, but not rightfully celebrated as she would have been in the absence of the perceived awesomeness of Daniel. Children were especially entranced by the spectacle of Emma Carter, but despite her mastery over what might have once been declared divine powers, that's all she was, a spectacle. She did have a strong following as celebrities go, but was seldom worshipped in the way she might have otherwise been. But what was she next to Daniel Dwyer, champion of the people of Earth? She was a blind black woman with a funny little ability who could tell you the outcome of every result of an attempt at random chance with certainty, and who sometimes appeared on the news for having aided Daniel in avoiding some minor disaster, most of which were unverifiable because of the future having been changed to prevent the predicted disaster from coming to fruition. She was entertainment for the masses, sought after for autographs more so than for guidance or advice. The world was atop Daniel's knee, drinking in his authority, happy believing that he would keep them safe always and forever. All the while, Llewellyn, in so many ways his better, slept in the mind of Emma Carter, having gifted Emma enough of her power that even it would have sufficed in an existence free of Daniel to demonstrate to the world a power fundamentally superior to that of Daniel's, and all the while, she seethed. She had to allow him to rise to power in spite of her hatred for him. Her only satisfaction was in knowing that she not only was going to be dismantling his world right in front of him, but would do so with his unwilling aid, he himself the tool of much of its destruction. Llewellyn simply beamed at the thought of turning the world's savior against it. She relished in the notion that the last emotion he would ever sense from the minds of so many people in anguish would be fear of him and hatred of him, and then she would kill him. That she looked forward to most of all. She was going to kill the dead man. She was going to put an end to Daniel Dwyer, that disembodied spirit who'd blanketed the earth in its protection, the self-proclaimed ruler of the world. True, this gave her joy, but not nearly so much joy as the thought of how ably she would destroy him before she would let him die. Daniel was guilty of crimes he never committed, and would pay dearly despite having done little to deserve it, but he was not entirely blameless. For in every other version of the future, every single time Lylin was to explore a version of events having allowed for the coming moment to be any different than it will come to be, Daniel invariably, horribly tortured and eventually murdered her. Every single time. And every time that Daniel killed her, it was foreseen that she failed to resurrect again as she otherwise would. This life, however, was her last. She would never reincarnate again, regardless of the mechanism of her death or any other circumstance. She had staved off the confrontation for as long as she could, and done everything possible to give herself an unfair advantage over Daniel Dwyer, and had succeeded thus far. She had an ocean of blood on her hands, but not a drop on her conscience. She and Hemhut, her beloved giant servant, had laid waste to entire civilizations in pursuit of the moment for which she now stood on the precipice. For now she slept. For now she seethed. For now she writhed, seated in the unconscious mind of Emma Carter, the 12th coming of Lylin. Emma awoke with a sudden start and quite literally flung herself out of bed, calling for Rosa amid frenzied statements to herself as she gathered the bare minimum amount of belongings and coverings she needed to be considered decent in public. "I need your eyes," she called out. Emma was halfway out the front door by the time Rosa had time to react. She came rushing up behind her, less prepared to step foot outside than Emma, who had not even put shoes or slippers on, but that at least had something on her feet, her eyes wide and skittering, mind abuzz with curiosity. "What did you see?" she asked the aging, barefooted, blind woman as she scrambled to catch up to her.